Hello everybody. It is time for another 5 p.m. Instagram Live, Pacific time. I'm just going to give everybody time to catch on, or come on I should say. Tonight we are going to be talking about a subject that I feel is very important in my practice because I work with a lot of women, and a lot of women ask me tons of questions about intermittent fasting, and there's a lot of misconceptions about intermittent fasting. So I want to go through those, and I essentially have 5 rules that I always coach people on whenever we are deciding whether or not to intermittent fast. So I will talk about those, and we'll just have a really great discussion. I'll have some time for questions at the end. So yeah. Just give people a couple more minutes. Get your water, come learn. Okay, awesome. Can't decide what to do to my hair today, you guys. It's getting so long. Okay, so I have my notes down here, so if I'm looking down there to keep myself on topic, that's why I'm doing that. Make sure that the volume is up and you can hear me okay. Okay, let's dive in. So intermittent fasting, super relevant right now in just everywhere, the health fitness world, with my female patients, even with my male patients. Anyone that's into health and fitness has pretty much heard of intermittent fasting. So intermittent fasting is this idea that you will essentially manipulate the time that you eat and the time that you don't eat in order to get some specific result. So the main reason why people would intermittent fast is usually they are overweight, they don't like eating in the morning, sometimes it's just because they hate breakfast, and oftentimes it's because women are just saying, you know, I want to lose those last 5 pounds that I can't get off. But a lot of my patients will tell me that they want to intermittent fast because it's convenient for them, because they are getting out the door in the morning really early, and they can't prepare breakfast, or they're wrangling a bunch of their kids, or they're trying to time their workouts appropriately, or they have work, people to take care of, a bunch of different things. So those are the reasons why people tend to ask me about intermittent fasting, and that will essentially influence kind of our decision. But weight loss, convenience, sometimes people get nauseated with breakfast, or they just hate breakfast, they get nauseated in the morning, or they're those types of people that just want to lose 5 pounds. But for those people that tell me that, that's not always a good reason to do intermittent fasting. So the main medical reasons why I want people to intermittent fast is usually because they're overweight. So there's some sort of obesity component here. Most people that are overweight or obese also have a degree of insulin resistance. So their body can't respond to the signal that insulin provides your cells. So your blood glucose tends to go up when you're insulin resistant. And those people that are obese and insulin resistant usually have some amount of metabolic syndrome. And metabolic syndrome is a big whole constellation of multiple different things. So it's abdominal obesity, high cholesterol, like high triglycerides is a big one, low HDL, which is your healthy cholesterol, having high blood sugar, whether it's random blood sugars or fasting blood sugars, elevated insulin levels, because those elevated levels have caused the cells to become resistant to the signal, high leptin levels. Leptin is a hormone, you guys, that your body makes, and it helps with your hunger fullness cues. So if you are having high levels of leptin in your system, it's your body saying, I'm full, I'm full, I'm full. Don't eat anymore, please. I have plenty of fuel, whether that's stored fuel or that's fuel that you're taking in consistently. So for some patients, I will measure their leptin levels, especially if they've tried to lose weight and it's not working, or they're overweight and we just need to get more pieces in the puzzle. So leptin, definitely we can check that one out. People that have metabolic syndrome often have hypertension, elevated CRP or inflammatory markers, because usually an increased fat mass is going to create inflammation, because adipose tissue is pro-inflammatory tissue. People that have PCOS and people that have fatty liver. So those people that have those symptoms are usually people that I call metabolically sick. So these are the people that have metabolic syndrome. So for these people, intermittent fasting can be really, really awesome for helping to realign most of those signs and symptoms. So we'll talk about that. So if you're obese, insulin resistant, if you have metabolic syndrome in any way, PCOS, or if you're just a mildly overweight person that needs to lose some weight, intermittent fasting could be a good fit for you. And most of my practice is focused on women's health, and so most of tonight I'm going to be talking about how intermittent fasting affects women, but I do see a lot of these things carry over into men's health as well. In general, though, men are not as sensitive to any kind of macronutrient manipulation in the diet, or they're not as sensitive to changes in nutrient levels as we are as women. And I'll talk about that in a second, but I want to start with rule number 1 for intermittent fasting. For those of you that just logged on, we're talking about intermittent fasting tonight, and I just talked about some of the main reasons why people come into me and want to start intermittent fasting, and then some of the medical implications of why I recommend intermittent fasting. And this video will also be up on YouTube and Instagram TV for those of you that are missing it. So you'll still be able to get the information, which is fantastic. So I'm going to give you 6 rules tonight, you guys. Number 1, for most women, intermittent fasting should be a tool, and it should not be a rule. And what that means is I see a lot of women who intermittent fast, and they do so for years and years and years and years. And what ends up happening is this completely backfires on their metabolism. And there's a couple reasons why. I see this happen in men also, especially men that are highly fit or who have a really active job or really stressful job. They're intermittent fasting, and their intermittent fasting is actually too stressful on their system, so it ends up backfiring for them. But in general, men are not as sensitive to the things that I'm going to talk about tonight. So for women, intermittent fasting should be a tool and not a rule. So we shouldn't be doing intermittent fasting for women for long periods of time. If we are, there's usually either a really big reason why we are, like the person is severely overweight or has severe insulin resistance or some other issues going on, or there's some other piece of the puzzle that we're missing. But it's really best used for short periods of time because of just how the endocrine system for women is sensitive. So I always tell my patients, as women, our physiology is essentially programmed, created for childbirth, for making babies. And whether you are a woman who wants to have children now, in the future, or ever, that's still how your physiology works. So when you're having your menstrual cycle every month, your body's consistently saying, oh my gosh, we might make a baby, I'm so excited, and then you get your period and you don't. But your hormones are consistently changing every month in preparation for the event of getting pregnant. And we have to keep that in mind whether you ever want to have kids or you don't, because the endocrine system is sensitive. So any sort of stressor that's going to affect our body in a negative way could potentially throw off our hormonal system, which is our endocrine system. So we make hormones from our ovaries, I don't know, I'm touching my neck, ovaries, I should have said thyroid. So our thyroid hormones, ovarian hormones, and our adrenal hormones. So it's kind of like a three-legged stool. There needs to be balance with all of those systems: ovarian hormones, adrenal hormones, and thyroid hormones. And all of those hormones affect all of the others. So if you are slow thyroid, that's going to affect your ability to conceive or to be fertile. If you are super stressed, that's going to possibly tank your thyroid. If you have low ovarian hormones, that's going to affect your brain and how your thyroid functions and different things. So all of your hormones, their relationship is essentially like this. So imbalance in one is going to affect the others. So with some women, when they start to intermittent fast, it ends up negatively affecting either their thyroid, their fertility, or their adrenal glands and their stress regulation system. So we usually, what I tend to tell women is we'll use intermittent fasting for a short period of time, whether it's 3 months, 6 months, sometimes a year. But I don't usually have women do intermittent fasting for years and years and years, because it's a high likelihood that you could become out of balance with those other systems. But the reason why I also don't recommend that people do it long term is because most people should do intermittent fasting under some sort of medical supervision from a doctor that knows what they're doing, whether or whatever qualified medical professional it is, whether it's a nutritionist that knows what they're doing, or your medical doctor, or your naturopath, your chiropractor, someone that has expertise in this area. Because like I was saying before, your body is in a delicate balance with its hormones. So what I will like to do on a lot of women is, do a physical exam, do a complete history, do some blood lab work, because the blood work will give us some indications about whether this person is healthy enough to intermittent fast, or has some of the abnormal blood markers that we were talking about in metabolic syndrome that would indicate whether intermittent fasting would actually be a good fit for them. So for some people, on paper or I should say history-wise or symptoms-wise, they sound like they'd be a good candidate for intermittent fasting, but then we run labs and we see a really good example is this person is way more stressed physiologically than we thought that they were. So sometimes what I'll do with that person is kind of rebuild their adrenal glands, and then do intermittent fasting. But there should always be some sort of monitoring of these people, because if we don't do any sort of testing, then we might not catch you as a really stressed person physiologically, which only shows up on blood work, and then we start intermittent fasting you and you actually get worse. You actually feel horrible and you actually gain more weight, just as an example. Or maybe you become less fertile. That can happen as well. So labs before any sort of intermittent fasting initiation, and then I always do labs during. So say our idea is that we want to intermittent fast for 3 to 6 months to lower your insulin levels. I'm going to be running a fasting insulin on you, a hemoglobin A1C, a fasting blood sugar, and a couple of other markers, maybe a leptin. And then we are going to start the intermittent fasting, and then we're going to check in maybe in like 30 days, depending on the person and, just some logistics. So labs before diet initiation, labs during, really, really important. But the labs will also tell me, along with symptoms, if there's any discrepancies, like if your body isn't handling it as well as we think. So for instance, one really good example is for a lot of women, we'll do a thyroid panel on them, and then we'll start intermittent fasting, and then we see that their thyroid numbers essentially get worse. It looks like they're going more hypothyroid or more underfunctioning thyroid, and that's not necessarily the direction that we want to go. So sometimes we'll end up tweaking what we're doing with intermittent fasting, or we will just stop intermittent fasting altogether. And I'll tell you about tweaking intermittent fasting. I think that's That's rule number 3. So we're currently on rule number 1. Rule number 1 is intermittent fasting should be a tool and not a rule. So we use intermittent fasting for a short period of time. And we're always under medical supervision. Always, always, always. And, you know, the big reason why, if we had to boil it down to why it should be a tool and not a rule, is because women are sensitive to changes in macronutrient levels, kind of like what I was talking before. Women are designed physiologically to create babies. This is what drives our physiology. Anything that endangers that ability is essentially something that can change our health. So you know, if your body is like, whoa, I'm super fertile, I'm totally down to make a baby, regardless of what you think about this, and then we decrease some macronutrient, whether we're going low carb or we're intermittent fasting or we're going keto or whatever, and then your body says, whoa, that is not the right thing for me, that is scary, you just took away a bunch of nutrients, then you know, your fertility is going to drop. Maybe your period, you lose your period, or your period becomes irregular, or it gets really light, or you get more PMS, different things. So women are just overall sensitive to changes in macronutrient levels. This is less the case if people are already fulfilling rule number 2, which is nutrient-rich diet must be the backbone. Hi everybody that's coming on. Yes, love your focus on testing before providing recommendations. Test, test, test. I am in general a person that will always test my patients before we do anything, because I can't tell you how many labs that we have run on people where their symptom picture, their signs, it's their history, it's all pointing in one direction, and then we find out that they have a super slow thyroid. That just happened this week with a patient who was 67, and we were checking in after not seeing each other for 3 years, and I rerun her labs just to kind of check in on things. She was having some issues with like fatigue and some autoimmune conditions that she had, but we found out that her thyroid was totally in the tank, like low thyroid hormone across the board. So what became priority was getting her on the right dose of thyroid medication, of changing her thyroid medication dose. It wasn't, you know, fixing her sugar cravings, which was another one of her complaints. It ended up being fix the thyroid, and then we can start working on the diet piece. So, you know, labs are really, really important, because not everybody, we can assume that people are generally healthy by the way that they look, but sometimes stuff has been happening physiologically, like there have been lots of physiological compensations that your body has been doing for you for a long period of time that's either depleting nutrients or resulting in other kind of disease states. So I'm always a big lab person, no matter who you are. When in doubt, test. So rule number 1 was make intermittent fasting a tool and not a rule for women. So don't intermittent fast for a long period of time. Number 2 rule is nutrient-rich diet must be the backbone. So if you are a person that has had a nutrient-rich diet for, you know, several years, then initiating some sort of intermittent fasting is not going to be as stressful or problem-causing for you, even if you're a woman. So you know, if someone comes into me and they're not eating a nutrient diet to start with, then that's number 1. That's what I teach them, is how to eat well, so that their body's consistently getting high levels of nutrients. And then once we do that, it's okay to minimize your feeding window and increase your fasting window. But we have to do that step number 1, because if we take a meal out, per se, with intermittent fasting and we stop having breakfast, then that's, you know, 33% less nutrients that person is going to be getting that day, which could really be bad for their physiology for some people, especially if you're coming off of like a standard American diet, or you're coming off of a vegan vegetarian diet. With all those 3 types of people, I'm often having to rehab them a little bit nutritionally. And, you know, the reason why, because basic failure to get in nutrients is a problem. Failure to get in basic nutrients, excuse me. My goodness. I love outlines. They keep me on track. But yeah, because most diets don't provide enough nutrients as a baseline, and I see that in my vegan vegetarian patients, especially long-term ones, and then people that are on a standard American diet, or people that are just not eating organic, or people that are eating too much sugar, or people that are traveling or that are under stressed or have some other disease state. So we have to get them on a better diet. And the other thing that you really can't do when you're on intermittent fasting is skip out on fat and protein. And if you know me, I tend to harp on protein in my practice because most of us don't get in enough protein, contrary to what is popularly believed in the media and the fitness world. Most women, protein is the one nutrient that they for some reason skimp out on. There seems to be this disconnect between what an actual portion is for your body size and getting that portion in consistently. So making sure that you're getting in enough protein, because whenever we go into a fasting state, your body's in a more catabolic state. So your body's in a state that's more, it's promoting breakdown, because when you don't have any nutrients coming in, your body's going to look at places in your body to take the nutrients from. So number one site for any sort of taking nutrients from is your muscles. Your muscles are actually one of the places that your body is like, I didn't get enough protein today. I'm going to take from this muscle, this juicy muscle over here. And that happens a lot. And, as you age, it's harder to keep your muscle mass up because you don't have that robust hormone, endocrine help in the background. For women, it's estrogen and testosterone. For men, it's mostly testosterone. So I work with a lot of women that are in their 40s that are in intermittent fasting, and I see this protein thing be a huge issue. But if I'm being real, I see this in almost every age group, women-wise. Most men tend to get in enough protein, I think, because maybe it's societally accepted that men eat a lot of protein. But, for women, if we eat, a whole chicken breast, it's like, oh my gosh, Susie, you ate too much or whatever, because people make stupid diet comments. But you might have needed, that 6-8 ounces of protein in that one sitting to get your daily needs. So can't skimp on protein and fat. And the amount of protein and fat that you need is different depending on whether you're training, whether you're breastfeeding, whether you're postpartum, whether you are not exercising a lot, if you're stressed, and that is something that we determine when talking for my patient visits. But one place that you guys could start is making sure you get a good amount of protein in the morning, like at least 30 grams of protein in the morning, because the way our circadian rhythm works is that your cortisol levels are high in the morning and they taper off throughout the day. And cortisol is this hormone that helps our immune system. It helps wake us up in the morning, helps give us energy throughout the day, and protein supports your cortisol levels. So at the time when we want cortisol to be the highest, we should be eating a good serving of protein to help support your cortisol levels. Timing is everything, which is rule number 3 for women in intermittent fasting. So timing is everything, and I will explain what that means. So like we were talking about before, intermittent fasting is all about establishing your feeding window and your fasting window. Your feeding window is the period of time of when you're eating that day. But for most women, it's about getting that window just right, because too long a period of time without food can be detrimental. Too short a period of time without food can actually decrease the results that we get, whether it's with weight loss or insulin sensitization. So common ratios that people usually follow, most of all of us are doing a 12 hours of eating with 12 hours of fasting. If we have dinner at 6-7 p.m. and then we're not having breakfast or any other food until 7-8 a.m., I'll miss you. Thanks for checking in. You can come back and listen to this if you're signing off. So don't worry. But let's see what I was talking about. So if you eat at 7-8 a.m. in the morning, and then when you wake up and you stopped eating at 7-8 p.m. at night, then that's a really natural or about 12-hour fast because you were sleeping, so you weren't eating. But intermittent fasting is all about extending that fasting time frame. So 12 fasting, 12 eating is usually just an overnight fast. A 14-10 is usually just pushing breakfast back a little bit. So 14 hours fasting, 10 hours eating. And I don't mean that you eat for 10 hours, obviously. I mean that within that 10-hour time frame is when you have all of your food for the day. Then there's a 16-8, which is 16 hours fasting, 8 hours eating. That's usually skipping breakfast and just having food starting at lunch. And then some people, I don't typically recommend this far of a fast, but some people do like an 18-6 split. So they are fasting for 18 hours and having their eating window for 6 hours. And that's usually when they're skipping breakfast and some of lunch, and then maybe having like a heavy snack in the afternoon, and then having a large dinner. So for some women that aren't doing the 12-12 ratio already, that's where I will start with them. But most people can start with like a 14-10 or a 16-8, and these numbers all add up to 24 because there's 24 hours in the day, if that wasn't obvious. And we usually will just start somewhere and see how they do. Most people, if they've been on a nutrient-dense diet and their labs check out okay, then we can push breakfast back, or we can start their feeding window at lunch. But a lot of this too has to do with just how people are structuring their day too. I get a lot of people who tell me it's convenient not to have breakfast, or I hate eating breakfast in the morning, or a big one, which is that I get nauseous in the morning. If you are a type of person that gets nauseous in the morning, what's most likely happening is that you have some imbalance in your cortisol levels. Cortisol levels affect your stomach acid levels. So if your cortisol levels are up and down, then sometimes that will suppress your stomach acid production. And when you don't make a lot of stomach acid with your stomach, then you're not going to have a drive for protein-rich foods. And so the foods that you should be drawn to in the morning, you're not going to be drawn to. So people that have low stomach acid and cortisol issues and tend to get nauseous in the morning usually have some blood sugar imbalance as well. But they're usually, reaching for pancakes, pastries, cereal, toast, things that are really easily digestible and not like heavy, like a protein or a fat. And that's actually a clue that, hey, we might need to work on your blood sugar levels, your gut health, your stomach acid, and get your cortisol right. So sometimes that nauseated in the morning is actually a really good clue for me to helping bring people back into balance. But going back to the reasons why we'll pick a certain feeding window, some people it's just convenience, we'll just pick one and start with it. Some people say like, oh, I really would just prefer to skip breakfast altogether and I can do lunch and dinner really easily. So I would start with, if you're watching this video and you want to try out intermittent fasting yourself and you've gotten labs from your doctor, a 14-10 eating window or 16-8 is probably going to be the best fit for you. And let's see, when we're doing a really extended fasting window, sometimes it can be hard with whether you're, sometimes it can be just hard for people to extend that window that we know that it would be really helpful for them. So there are certain things that you can drink and take in the morning that aren't necessarily going to get you out of a fasting state because they're not going to create any sort of insulin response. So those are, high fat foods. But I will usually have people do some sort of bulletproof coffee or black coffee. So bulletproof coffee is usually a blend of high quality butter or MCT oil or coconut cream, or some people do cocoa butter. Some people put an egg in their bulletproof coffee. It's kind of cool. Apparently it makes it kind of whippy. I've never done that before though, so I can't vouch for that. So some sort of bulletproof coffee, fatty coffee variation, and that can help sustain them and keep them in a fasting state until they need to eat at lunch. So some people feel a lot better doing that. And a lot of my patients, they do enjoy their coffee. So I don't necessarily want to take away their coffee if there's no, medical reason why not to, because coffee in and of itself is not inherently bad, though a lot of people do better without coffee, which is a whole other discussion. I should probably do a coffee one of these. Sometimes people just do green tea and they put some fat in their green tea, like coconut oil is really yummy. And then some people will do like a snack that's light and fatty, but doesn't cause any sort of release of insulin. And it's just a small snack. So whether that's a couple of scrambled eggs or a couple of bacons, or a chicken sausage, what have you. But timing is everything. So sometimes we will start someone on, a 16-8 fasting window, and they don't do very well. They find that they're more hungry, they're irritable, their energy's going down, they're just not feeling well. And those are all metrics that you're going to want to track whenever you do intermittent fasting. So you have to, I wish I could write this down for you guys. I'm going to post this though. So I'll write them down to remember to write to you. But you want to look at your sleep, your energy, your hunger, your cravings. Because if your sleep is becoming poor, your energy's going down, you're getting increasingly hungry, or you're getting a lot of cravings, then that's a sign that your body's not quite ready for that far of a fasting window. Or you're not ready for intermittent fasting in general, depending on where we've started. So this is really important because I see a lot of women that come into me with a variety of conditions, but they have been intermittent fasting without any sort of medical supervision for XYZ amount of time, and their hunger, energy, craving, sleep, it is not in check at all. Plus mood. Mood can be a metric of this too. So if you guys follow Dr. Jade Teta, he calls this your schmeck in check, which is a really cute way of remembering it. So your sleep, your hunger, your mood, your energy, your cravings, those are all signs that you can look at from your own body to monitor whether you are actually doing well with intermittent fasting or not. So if you are waking up really hungry, if you are getting hunger swings later in the day, if your energy is going down, if your sleep is not doing well, then we often need to step back and think about, is intermittent fasting a good fit for you? Or do we need to adjust your fasting or your feeding window? And sometimes, you guys, that's all we need to do. All we need to do is decrease, say you're doing like an 18-6 or 16-8. Sometimes that's all we need to do is just take you down to a 14-10 or just a 12-12. And that really works. I do that with a lot of people, and it's something that nobody seems to talk about this in the fitness industry, of really tailoring intermittent fasting to you. If you read lots of articles and blog posts, they'll tell you stuff like, you have to do a 16-8, like that's the typical way. But you might have great results from intermittent fasting from doing a 12-12 window, a 14-10 window, and you can always switch it up too. This doesn't have to be rigid. Your body changes all the time. Your biochemistry is different every day, though it has its tendencies. So once you eat a nutrient-dense diet consistently, then you can figure out what your body needs on a day-to-day basis. So you can assess whether those hunger, fullness cues are going well, whether your energy is going well. So timing is everything, and that's rule number 3. Rule number 4, hate to break it to you guys, fruit is not that good for you. And I hate saying that, but in general, people overeat fruit. People are putting lots of fruit in their smoothies. They're doing tons of dried fruit. They're eating pastries, they're eating breads, they're eating rices, they're doing like farro bowls and acai bowls, and there's just too much fruit and carbs coming into the system consistently. And it is really my belief that you should be eating 1 to 2 pieces of fruit a day. Berries are lower on the glycemic index, so berries are easier for your body to metabolize. But you should never eat fruit alone. You should eat fruit with a meal. So, a really good example is it's summer coming up. We're all going to be starting to eat watermelon again because watermelon's in season. And it's really easy to just kick back a lot of watermelon in one sitting, but that's fine as long as you eat that with the barbecue that you're eating, with a piece of protein, with some fat with it. Do it with a meal. Don't just do fruit alone. And the reason why is because fruit has sugar, which your body has to process. Sugar will spike your insulin levels, and usually with intermittent fasting, that's one thing that we're really trying to heal is insulin spikes. So think about the glycemic load, the sugar load on your body at one instance. We don't want to have all these insulin spikes. The other reason is because fruit contains fructose. And fructose is a type of sugar that's commonly found in fruit. And it's a natural fruit sugar, but the problem with fructose is that it requires a lot of liver power to be metabolized. There's I believe it's 1 or 2 very specific enzymes that have to change fructose into a form that we can use. And your liver can really easily get gummed up and too overwhelmed by the amount of sugar that we eat from fruit. So essentially high levels of fructose in the diet lead to liver overload, and our livers are generally pretty overloaded in general with all of the toxins and chemicals and poor air and poor food choices that we make every day, because our world is getting more and more toxic as we go on. Compare today to 20 years ago to 20 years before that, and the toxic load, the toxic burden that we have every day coming at us is astronomically lower, 20 years ago, 40 years ago, 60 years ago. So that's the baseline that our body has to deal with, plus anything that we do to our body, like eat too much fruit in one sitting. So the other fun fact is that fructose, I'm going to read this for you. Fructose is preferentially metabolized to fats in the liver. So your liver is essentially going to be like, oh, this is so easy, I can make fat from fructose, and it's just going to shunt it down that pathway. And that ends up leading to conditions like fatty liver, which is really not good. Fatty liver is reversible to an extent, but having fatty liver is something that we need to actually work pretty hard on to actually get on top of it. So we have to work hard to get it to improve. If you have a fatty liver, think about little fat globules getting in the way of all of the detoxification processes that your liver has to do every day. So your liver function goes down, which is not good. So pretty much we have to have people, I tell my patients, watch your smoothies. How much fruit are you putting in a smoothie? It should be like half a cup of fruit and then other stuff. It shouldn't be a whole banana, a whole pint of blueberries, and a whole mango. Like, would you ever eat that in one sitting? No. So don't put it in your smoothies, because you're going to blend it up and drink it, and then your blood sugar is going to go nuts, and we're just, it's just bad news bears. So watching your smoothies, stopping drinking juice. So a lot of those cute green juices that you can get in the store actually have a ton of sugar in them. So get the low sugar ones if you have to get a green juice. Obviously get rid of soda and anything that has high fructose corn syrup. So this is candy and a lot of packaged foods, but actually agave syrup and honey are really high fructose. So I don't always recommend those sweeteners to people. Agave is also highly, highly refined. So if we have to choose between agave and honey, I'm going to pick honey every day. because honey is way more natural than agave. Agave they have to extract and use, what's the word, certain chemicals that are going to pull out the sugars and concentrate them, and they use a lot of chemical solvents, there we go, that was the word I was looking for, to do this, and it's actually, really not good. So, but unfortunately it's touted as being really good for people that have diabetes or that are diabetic, and people that are diabetic have fructose problems, they have liver problems, they have pancreas problems, they have sugar problems, so we don't want them to be having any sort of sugar like that. So if you have people in your life that are all about agave, maybe point them to this video. Okay, so let's do a little bit of a recap because we are coming up on rule number 5. So rule number 1 was, for most women, intermittent fasting should be a tool and not a rule, so we shouldn't be intermittent fasting for a long time. Number 2, nutrient-rich diet has to be the backbone, because if we're taking away a meal like breakfast, then we need to make sure that we're getting nutrients in consistently. Rule number 3, timing is everything. So whether that's a 16-8 window, or that's just pushing back your breakfast, or it's just doing a 12-12 window, makes a big difference. Rule number 4, fruit isn't that good for you, so we have to evaluate how much fruit we're getting in our diet. And then rule number 5, I guess I technically only have 5 rules, so we're going to wrap it up soon here. But rule number 5, not all carbs are bad. And I say this because keto is becoming very, 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 very popular these days. And I see keto done well, and I see keto done really, really poorly. So I really want to encourage you, especially as women, we're kind of told society-wise that eating carbs is bad for you, but really we need carbs and we need fat to make healthy hormones. Starch is so helpful for building estrogen, progesterone, especially, and having a healthy cycle, building healthy babies, having a healthy mood, and not being so up and down. So carbs aren't all bad. So for a lot of women that I'm teaching to intermittent fast, we have to think about portion control of carbs, but also timing of carbs, because that matters. Because if we're intermittent fasting, we're usually not also going low carb at the same time. Maybe we are, maybe we're not, depending on the person, depending on what their medical indications are for intermittent fasting. So timing of carbs and the portions matter. So, low carb isn't always the answer. And a lot of people will do that to lose weight, or they'll combine low carb with intermittent fasting. But intermittent fasting or low carb is essentially like cutting out a macronutrient group. So that can be perceived as stressful in the body, which isn't always the best thing to do. So something to think about. But for women, I actually tend to do this. I tend to tell them to take their carbs or do their carbs at night, eat their carbs at night. And the reason why is because carbs help sleep. And I've worked with hundreds of women, and usually every, let's do a statistic. 4 out of 5 women will complain to me about their sleep, whether it's sleep initiation, like insomnia, or sleep maintenance, or waking up in the middle of the night, or waking up too early in the morning, or like twiddling their thumbs at 2 a.m. because they're wide awake. So sleep issues are a big thing, and they shouldn't be taken lightly, because sleep is a determinant of health. So if you're not sleeping, you're not going to do very well at all. And you're not going to lose weight if you sleep. So, if you're intermittent fasting for weight loss, because you need to lose weight clinically, medically, and then your sleep starts to get disrupted, then we need to reevaluate. So I have women do their carbs at night to help sleep, but also to help boost their progesterone levels. Progesterone is the hormone that balances out estrogen. It's pro-gestation, so for women that are on their fertility journey, that is the hormone that you want for keeping your baby around once egg meets the sperm. And women with low progesterone levels are generally more stressed, more tired, it's more difficult to conceive. And so if we do carbs at night, then progesterone is a hormone that helps us sleep. So it actually helps with sleep initiation, sleep maintenance, and then the carbs also have a positive effect on our serotonin levels, but also it helps maintain our blood sugar long term through the night as well. So I'll have women do their carbs at night versus in the morning, because like I was saying before when we were talking about cortisol levels and protein, your protein levels should your protein intake should be high in the morning, and then your carbohydrate intake should be higher in the evening, so for that sleep effect. So timing of your macronutrients can be incredibly helpful to get you where you need to go, whether it's you're fixing your insulin resistance, or you are bodybuilding, or you're trying to get the right physique. Great question. What types of carbs, or what types of carbs are good to eat at night? Great question. So let's see, was I going to get into this? I was going to get into this. This is all essentially personal preference. And it takes some experimentation. So one of my favorite things for people to do is a half of a banana or a quarter of a banana with some cashew butter, almond butter, and maybe some sprinklings of sea salt, because sea salt helps support your adrenal glands. So that is one really good snack. And it's not too heavy, you guys, because you don't want to eat something that's going to be really heavy or really filling when you are trying to sleep. I have this recipe that I make with almond butter. It's called cinnamon honey almond butter, and it's got cinnamon, which is good for your blood sugar. It's got a little bit of honey for sweetness. It's got a little bit of molasses, which molasses is really high in minerals and it's really nutrient dense. And then it's got some coconut oil, which is super great for you, and it's got really good source of healthy fats. So I'll mix all of that up in an almond butter, and so sometimes if I wake up in the middle of the night, I'll take a spoonful of that. I call it chab, which is cinnamon honey almond butter. If you guys want to, I can post up the recipe, so just let me know. Some people will do like a rice cake and some nut butter. Some people that can do dairy will do like berries and Greek yogurt. Sometimes you can have like a little mini dinner, like a little piece of protein, a little couple of roasted vegetables, and maybe some butter on top, something like that. It really depends. Sometimes I'll have people do like a brown rice tortilla with something inside of it. I also really like coconut cream, like coconut manna, and you take a date and you put coconut cream inside of the date. So that is really delicious. But you have to be a person that has decent insulin sensitivity to eat a date, because a date is more higher carb than the other things that I was mentioning. What else? Chia pudding can be great before bed. Also helps you poop, so that's great. A lot of these are kind of like nut butter centric ideas, but I just can't say enough about how that helps with your blood sugar. I feel like nuts and nut butters have like the perfect balance of a little bit of fiber, some fat, a little bit of protein, and they're just really satiating. So I like some combo of nuts or nut butter before bed. And some people that can do dairy, cheese is always an option too. Like for some of my pregnant women, I have them put like cubes of cheese or like a little bowl of nuts, especially like salted nuts, at their bedside table. So if they're waking up in the middle of the night, they can eat a little snack. Joined a bit late, so apologize if you. Yes. Okay. So the question was essentially hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. So how your brain talks to your adrenals, which are your stress regulating systems, and intermittent fasting. Good or not so much. So if there's a lot of dysregulation, if you're someone that's in a chronic stress response state, then usually I will work with that person to help with that, help heal up their adrenal glands before we do intermittent fasting, because sometimes it can backfire, because intermittent fasting can be too stressful for the body. But it matters to the person, and some people have a little bit more wiggle room to intermittent fast while we're doing adrenal gland rehab. It depends what their issue is, whether they, because some people are on like the hangry roller coaster, and so we know that their blood sugar regulation is poor. Some people have high insulin and they're overweight, so we know that intermittent fasting would be good for them. Some people have that, plus they are, plus they're super stressed. So it's kind of a balance, because sometimes what I do with people when they're in intermittent fasting is really increase their fats. And when you have HPA dysfunction, the axis between your brain and your adrenal glands dysfunction, then those people tend to crave more fat. So sometimes the diet support that I do with people, even though they're stressed, plus intermittent fasting ends up being okay. It's really a like case by case basis, but for someone that has a lot of adrenal problems and high stress, intermittent fasting for long periods of time would not be good for you. But you might be the type of person that can do a 12-12 or 14-10 or maybe a 16-8, but nothing longer than that. And you might only do that a couple of days a week. And that's the other thing I didn't mention. You don't have to intermittent fast every single day of the week. I often will have women intermittent fast Monday, Wednesday, Friday, or say they're going to work Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, and they start early. Then I'll have them do their intermittent fasting on those days and then eat regularly the other days. So you don't always have to intermittent fast, every single day. We can still get benefits from it. Really depends on the person. The other thing I want to say about carbs is, whenever I talk about carbs, women tend to freak out because I usually tell people to eat more carbs. And they were like, oh my gosh, how do I do this? So if you're doing it at night, that's going to be beneficial for you. But also if you're timing carbs with working out, then that can be a really effortless way to do it too. So your body can then refuel in that 2-hour post-workout window, or even the same day, if I'm being honest. It can refuel with the glucose that you're taking in from the carbs. And so it will turn less of that glucose from that meal into fat storage. So perfect example. I do this often in my life. One thing that I really like to do is go out to pizza. The first Friday of every month, typically with my fiance. We've been doing this for a while. And, we tend to, on those days, for some reason, intermittent fast, so we can crush a lot of pizza that night. But even if pizza is going to be my third meal of the day, I usually always make sure that I have worked out sometime that day, whether it's a run or it's weights or whatever it is that I'm doing. I make sure that I've worked out that day, because then I know that the carbs from the pizza is going to have somewhere to go into my muscles. It's not just going to all turn to fat. So you can kind of hack how you time your carbs. And I would also say you have to do this mindfully. Make sure that this is not coming from any eating disordered state, which I'm really, really cautious to not induce in patients and people. Great question. Where for your pizza? So we live in San Diego, and we go to this place called Woodstock's Pizza. They have gluten-free pizza that's really good. And we get pepperoni on it, and one of my favorite things is peppers and onions too. We change up the toppings every time we go. But there's lots of good places to get gluten-free pizza in San Diego. Blue Ribbon in Encinitas is great. You can always go to CPK, California Pizza Kitchen, but I don't recommend that because they don't really put great stuff in their food. Where's the other place? Sammy's Wood-Fired Pizza can be a really good spot. But I digress. Timing your carbs to when you work out and also eating your carbs later at night can be really helpful, because not all carbs are bad. So that's the last rule. The other rule that's kind of, pizza port. Yeah, I forgot about pizza port. The other rule that I often tell people is if you're intermittent fasting or especially going low carb, have some electrolytes on board. So this is rule number 6, is have some electrolytes on board, because if we're decreasing a meal every day by intermittent fasting, or we're going any sort of low carb, then electrolytes can really help. Electrolytes can really help with like the carb flu, any workout recovery, insulin resistance, and adrenal dysfunction. So all of you that are my patients that are watching will probably laugh, because you know that I put you on the electrolyte powder that I'm obsessed with, because it makes a big difference for how your brain functions, your workout recovery, how your adrenal glands work, because your adrenal glands, they need electrolytes to function. And a lot of us are really depleted in electrolytes, honestly, because our stomach acid is poor. We can't break it down from our food. We can't absorb it. So I'm often getting people on electrolytes, and it just aids the weight loss, stress response, the whole process of intermittent fasting it helps with. So let's do a recap, and then I'll take some questions, though I've kind of been taking some here and there. We talked about 6 rules for intermittent fasting. So rule number 1, for most women, intermittent fasting should be a tool and not a rule. So we shouldn't be doing intermittent fasting all day, every day for years, because that can create some imbalances. So we have to check in on it. And I'm always recommending that people have medical supervision when they are intermittent fasting, including labs. Because things can go sour quickly, because you have a balance between your thyroid, your ovarian hormones, and your adrenal hormones, which can get off. Your rule number 2, nutrient-rich diet must be the backbone, because with intermittent fasting, we are manipulating your feeding window and your fasting window, and sometimes we are skipping a meal. Essentially, we're taking out breakfast. So if you don't have nutrient-dense diet as a backbone, then you're going to be lacking in nutrients, and then that's when disease happens. Rule number 3, timing is everything. So I work with patients to figure out what timing window is the best fit for them for their intermittent fasting to get them towards their goals. And for most people, we just need to tweak their window and just get it just right, and it'll work for them. Some people are on a fasting window that's way too big, and we shorten it, and then they do great. So timing is everything. Number 4, fruit is not as good for you as you think it is. You're probably eating too much fruit. So fructose can be really hard on the liver. Fructose is often metabolized to fat. So I'm often rehabbing people's love of fruit, unfortunately, because it's really high sugar, and it's really, really hard if we're trying to align any sort of insulin resistance to be taking in so much sugar. And then rule number 5, not all carbs are bad. So when you are intermittent fasting, you don't have to go low carb. I just plain don't recommend going intermittent fasting and going low carb at the same time, because that can cause a lot of dysfunction. But if you time the carbs and you're portion sizing your carbs, that matters. So timing your carbs for women before bed versus in the morning can help with sleep and help with your progesterone levels. And timing your carbs when close to workouts can mean that you are, I'm getting a 1 minute remaining on Instagram. They must be kicking me off for 1 hour's things. So timing carbs with your workouts. And then if you're not on some sort of electrolyte powder, I would highly recommend some sort of electrolyte powder for people that are intermittent fasting. For those of you that just joined, hello, I see you. Any questions before I go? We have 1 minute and 30 seconds to talk about some questions. You can always DM me if you're shy. But this video is going to be up on YouTube and Instagram Live. So if you missed it, if you just tuned in, I know a bunch of you guys just kind of popped on. Don't forget, I do these every Monday night at 5, and we get right into it at 5. A lot of people tend to tune in like right before 6, which shift it back an hour. Any questions? We got a minute. We got a minute left. I will answer them. Do you guys like my fern? Isn't he pretty? Ferns are plants that help detoxify the air. where you live. So I have one by my bed, and he's adorable. I put him in a really pretty planter. Life hacks. Okay, you guys, I don't see any questions coming in, so I hope you learned a lot. This video will be available other ways. Again, thank you for joining in. These are super fun. You're welcome. And I sent out a survey to ask you guys what kind of topics you want me to cover, kind of like a content, what content do you guys want to hear from me? I sent that survey out to my email list, so if you didn't get that, you need to be on my list. If you want the survey so you can chime in, give me your voice, DM me, I'll send you the link, and good night and good luck.